Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. In the previous episode, when I was discussing Alan Watts' book, What is Tao, and we were going through the ideas of Confucianism and Taoism, there was a chapter on I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese text, and I said that I will discuss it separately. So here we are. We are going to discuss I Ching, and in this episode, we'll talk about how it is practiced, how this book is used, and how you can apply it in making certain decisions. So, first of all, in case you're not familiar, I Ching, or in English it is called as Book of Changes, it's an ancient Chinese divination text, and it provides guidance. It provides guidance through hexagrams. What are those hexagrams? How do they look like? We will get to those details later. Right now, I'll just give you the brief idea that these are symbolic figures and they are made by 6 yin lines or yang lines. So there is this concept of yin and yang in lines also. Yin lines are broken lines. Just consider as them as two small dashes, and yang is a one solid line or one long dash. That is yang, and yin is just one broken line, or you can see them as two small dashes. So this text and this practice of hexagram, it is used as an oracle to gain insight into your current situations or future possibilities, and we have references to different kind of hexagrams. There are 64 in total, and based on those references, all these possibilities, present and future, they are interpreted, and much can be learned about your life situation. As you can see, this core wisdom of this book is rooted in the interplay of yin and yang, and it represents binary cosmic forces, whether it's masculine and feminine, light or dark, good and evil. So that's what essentially this book is all about, and we'll discuss it now. So how do we draw the lines? How do we start the process? First of all, we need 3 coins. Once you have 3 coins, you shake them and you throw all 3 coins together at the same time. Each throw of the 3 coins will give you a single line. If you have a Chinese coin, you will clearly see yin and yang in that. If you have any other currency coin, then the tail sides of that coin will be counted as yin, and the reverse side, the heads, will be counted as yang. And the value of yin would be 2, and the value of yang would be 3. So there will be 4 possibilities in this case. One is all the coins are yin, then the total value of all 3 coins is 6, and we draw a broken line or a negative line, and that will become the bottom line of the hexagram. Remember, this is just the first throw. We'll have 5 more throws, but we are discussing for the first throw different possibilities. The second possibility for the first throw would be if 2 coins are yin and 1 is yang, then the total value is 7, and an unbroken or a positive line is drawn. This is called yang line. The other possibility is 1 coin is yin and 2 are yang, then the total value is 8, and a broken or a negative line, the so-called yang yin, is drawn, And if all the coins, which is the fourth possibility, all the three coins are yang, the total value is 9, and an unbroken or positive line is drawn, the old yang. So in four scenarios, we draw the first line. This is at the bottom of the hexagram. Based on the first throw, we'll have the first line. And then we have the second line based on second throw, and so on. We'll have 6 lines, we'll have the hexagram, and we will come up with the final figure eventually. And what is the meaning of that figure? We'll have to go to the reference section. Remember, the reference section will give you or lead you towards the answer. For example, if you had a question in mind that what is the best thing for me in my life or present state, what is the best thing for me that can happen? And then you throw the coins, you draw the hexagram, and then you refer to the chart, and then you interpret what the oracle is saying. That's how I Ching works. Now, all of this might sound a little weird, especially to a Western listener. And that's why I think it's quite relevant to read Alan Watts' view and how he's explaining these ideas from a Western point of view as well as Eastern point of view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from his book What is Tao, and the section where he's talking about the Western point of view on I Ching, and I hope it'll give you a better perspective. So here we go. I'm just going to read from the book, A Western Point of View. You may well say, however, that this is a thoroughly crazy way of coming to decisions, especially if I were to ask something more specific than our question, or if I had asked advice on some momentous decision I had to make. We would say, from our modern scientific point of view, that flipping coins to come to the great decisions of life is the stupidest thing one could possibly do. After all, it neglects all rational cogitation about our situations. It takes no account of the data available in the situation. It makes no intelligent assessment of the possibilities, and before we make any important decision, we like to think over all the factors involved. We go into the situation and think it out thoroughly. We balance the pros against the cons, and we balance assets against deficits. And therefore, we believe that nothing could be more superstitious than relying upon an oracle that in turn relies entirely on the random chance of falling coins. We know that the coins have no relation to the problem whatsoever, and so naturally our contemporary point of view about this and in all other methods of fortune telling, divination, and so on is that if they work at all, it is nothing more than a pure chance. And then he writes from the Eastern point of view. Let me read it from the book. An Eastern point of view. To someone who believes in this system, however, perhaps a traditional Chinese or Japanese person, it does not seem far-fetched at all. They might say to us, first of all, when you consider the facts that are involved in any particular decision and calculate all the data, how do you select which facts are most relevant? If you're going to enter into a business contract, for instance, perhaps the facts you believe pertain to this contract are the state of your own business, the state of the other person's business, and the prospects of the matter. But you probably would not think about many of the personal matters that might affect the plan. And nevertheless, something that you may never have considered at all may enter into the situation and change it completely. The person you're going into business with may slip on a banana peel and get seriously injured. and become inefficient or even detrimental in the business. How could anyone ever predict such an eventuality by taking a sane and rational assessment of the situation? Or perhaps they might say to us, how do you know when you have collected enough data? After all, the data and the potential problems involved in any particular situation are virtually infinite. What causes you to stop collecting data or stop gathering information about how to solve a problem? I think you just collect information until you are either tired of collecting it or until the time comes to act and you have run out of time to collect more data. And one could present a very convincing argument that because you decide when to stop investigating in a very arbitrary way, this method is just as arbitrary as flipping coins. And then in the next section, he talks about probabilities and decisions. He says, well, we could argue, what about probabilities? After all, we rely a great deal upon statistics in order to make decisions. But statistics have their limitations. They work very well when averaging what a large number of people are going to do, but are useless in individual cases. The actuarial tables used by insurance companies, for example, will tell you quite accurately the average lifespan of an adult male or female, smoker or non smoker. But in any individual case, these tablets will not tell us when someone is going to die. And the same is probably true if we look at any given decision that we may make. The probability is that we will weigh all the information and in the final moment make our decision based upon our hunch, which is really a gut feeling about the situation that has little to do with rational thought. Now, I am of a somewhat skeptical temperament, and I very much doubt if in fact this way of coming to decision really works. But I say this with a certain qualification because we can never really prove whether any method of coming to a decision really works. I may make a supremely foolish decision, and as a result of it, I get killed. But there would be absolutely no way of showing that my getting killed at that moment did not preserve me from a worse fate, and perhaps from making mistakes that involve the lives of many other people. If I do happen to succeed by making a right decision in business affairs and I earn millions of dollars, there is likewise no way of showing that this was not so bad for my character that it was the worst thing that could have possibly happened. So we never really know whether the outcome of a decision will be a failure or a success in the long run, because the unknown, only what comes next, will show whether it was good or bad. And the unknown stretches infinitely before us. And then he talks about disadvantages and advantages. He says, there are advantages and disadvantages to both modern scientific inquiry and to the system of this old Chinese book of divination. There is a bad side to the book of changes and a distinct disadvantage in Chinese culture. The Chinese came to rely so much on the book of changes and its system of symbols for classifying all natural phenomena that in the course of time it became a very rigid structure and eventually excluded the perception of novelty. The warning for us in this, whereby we might take advantage of their mistake, is to realize that we are doing the same thing with scientific method. There are certain kinds of personalities who tend to become very rigid in their scientific ideas and therefore automatically exclude certain possibilities because they do not happen to conform with alleged scientific dogma. Take, for example, what we call ESP or extrasensory perception although I prefer to call it extraordinary sensory perception. There is extremely strong evidence that perception of this kind occurs, and yet many scientific people will ignore that evidence because they say that it simply cannot happen. Limiting their inquiry in this way is to fall into the same rut that the Chinese fell into when they relied too exclusively upon the classification of the world and of events found in the Book of Changes. Both systems, on the other hand, have their advantages. Just as there is a positive use for science, there is a positive side to the Book of Changes. The picture seen in the book through the interplay of these forms is founded on a view of life that is very suggestive to us of a new way of looking at our information and is in accord with certain points of view that are now developing in our own science. It is a way of looking at life that focuses on not so much the causal relationship between the events as the pattern of events as a whole. And then in the next section, he writes about a comparison of East and West. He says, "Let me try to show the difference between these two ways of investigation. We think of causality, we think chiefly of the way events are determined by the past, and by extension, the way the behavior of people is determined by their past. It is as if events were a lot of different marbles that are thrown together and knock each other around. In tracing the movement of any particular marble, therefore, we will try to find out which other marbles knocked it about and so trace its individual history further and further back. Until quite recent times, the point of view of Western science was based almost exclusively on the idea of causality. It had become a study of the way things are influenced by past things. The point of view of that underlies the Book of Changes is that instead of trying to understand events as relationship to past causes, it understands events by relation to their present pattern. In other words, it comprehends them by taking a total view of the organism and its environment instead of what we might call a linear view. Although the Chinese have not really applied this approach to their technology, they have traditionally applied to it to their art and to their philosophy of natural law, and their essential point of view is quite different from ours. We can find a suitable analogy for the Western way of looking at things by saying that we are attempting to understand events in accordance with the order of words. I can say, "This dog has no bark," and then say, "This tree has no bark." And the meaning of bark in these two sentences, it is determined by what went before them. So I want to know what bark means. I have to go back to what happened in the past. If you look at what I would rather call the order of design, however, and not the order of words, you find a rather different situation because all of the elements of the design come to you together. They are, as we would say, of a piece. And you see their relationship to their context and meaning all at once, much as you see the image appear when you develop a photographic plate. The meaning of each part of the design is relative to the rest of the design, just as you see it at this moment. In the same way, the fundamental philosophy of the Book of Changes and of the Chinese idea of the relationship between events is to understand every event in its present context. We do not understand something by what went before so much as we do by understanding it in terms of what goes with it. So the idea of the Book of Changes is to review through its symbols the total pattern of the moment when the question is asked, and the supposition is that the pattern of this moment governs even the tossing of the coins. The interesting comparison that arises out of this comes about because we in the West have tended to understand events in accordance with linear or sequential orders like the order of words. In accordance with the rules of causality, we have evolved or constructed a conception of nature based on the structure of written law. But in the Chinese language, we come again to Li, the word for natural law, that originally meant marking in jade, the grain in wood, or the fiber in muscle, which is really the basic fundamental pattern of things. Images such as the markings in jade or the grain in wood are used because they have an extremely subtle, complex pattern that shows a large area of events all happening together at once. These patterns have to be taken in and understood at a glance, in the same way as we take in a design at a glance. The fundamental Chinese idea of the order of nature is not compatible with formulation in the order of words because it is organic and is not linear pattern. In other words, when we think of beauty, we know very clearly what beauty is, but it is absolutely impossible to write down a set of laws and rules that can show us how to create beautiful objects. And mathematicians, for example, often feel that certain equations, certain expressions are peculiarly beautiful because they are meticulous people. They try to think out exactly why they are beautiful and ask if we could make up a rule or formula to describe when beauty will or will not appear. Although they have proposed the criteria of elegance as a kind of proof to be considered, their general conclusion is that if we could make up a rule and apply it in mathematics, and if we could always by the use of this rule get a beautiful result, eventually those results would cease to impress us as being beautiful. They would become sterile and dry. And in the same way, the order of nature, the order of justice, and the order of beauty are things that we can know in ourselves, yet we cannot write down in black and white. The wiser person, therefore, is one who has the sensibility to see those things in themselves and to know that beauty lies in the variability of experience from one situation to another. And then finally, based on all this analysis, Alan Watts draw a conclusion, and he writes a long concluding section which I am going to read next for you. It says, ultimately, of course, it is absolutely impossible to understand and appreciate our natural universe unless you know when to stop investigating. In our restlessness, we are always tempted to climb every hill and cross every skyline to find out what lies beyond. Yet, as you get older and wiser, it is not just flagging energy but wisdom that teaches you to look at mountains from below or perhaps just climb them a little way. For at the top you can no longer see the mountain, and beyond on the other side there is perhaps just another valley like this. An old aphorism from India says, what is beyond is that which is also here. And you must not mistake this for a kind of boredom or a tiring of adventure. It is instead the startling recognition that in the place where we are now, we have already arrived. This is it. What we are seeking is, if we are not totally blind, already here. For if you must follow that trail up the mountain to its bitter end, you will discover that it leads eventually right back into the suburbs. But only an exceedingly stupid person will think that is where the trail really goes. For the actual truth is, the trail goes to every single place that it crosses, and it leads to where you are standing and watching it. Watching it vanish into the hills, you are already in the truth beyond, which it leads to ultimately. Many a time I have had intense delight listening to some hidden waterfall in the mountain canyon, a sound made all the more wonderful since I have set aside the urge to ferret the thing out and clear up the mystery. I no longer need to find out just where the stream comes from and where it goes. Every stream, every road, if followed persistently and meticulously to its end, leads nowhere at all. And this is why the compulsively investigative mind is always ending up in what it believes to be the hard and bitter reality of the actual facts. Playing a violin is, after all, only scraping a cat's entrails with horsehair. The stars in heaven are, after all, only radioactive rocks and gas. But this is nothing more than the delusion that truth is to be found only by picking everything to pieces like a spoiled child picking at its food. And this is also why the plateaus of the Far East so seldom tell all and why they avoid filling in every detail. This is why they leave in their paintings great areas of emptiness and vagueness, and yet the paintings are not unfinished. These are not just unfilled backgrounds, they are integral parts of the whole composition, suggestive and pregnant voids and drifts that leave something to our imagination. And we do not make the mistake of trying to fill them in with detail in the mind's eye. We let them remain suggestive. So it is not by pushing relentlessly and aggressively beyond those hills that we discover the unknown and persuade nature to disclose her secrets. What is beyond is also here. Any place where we are may be considered the center of the universe. Anywhere that we stand can be considered the destination of our journey. To understand this, however, we have to be receptive and open. In other words, we have to do what Lao Tzu advised when he said that while being a man, one should also preserve a certain femininity, and thereby one will become a channel for the whole universe. And this is not just good advice for men. Yet, that is one of the misunderstandings in which I believe our culture in the West is submerged. The feminine values are despised, and we find typically among men a strange kind of reluctance to be anything but an all male man. But there is a tremendous necessity for us, all of us, to value alongside, as it were, the aggressive masculine element symbolized by the sword, the receptive feminine element symbolized perhaps by the open flower. After all, our human senses are not knives, they are not hooks, they are the soft veil of the eye, the delicate drum of the ear, the soft skin on the tips of the fingers and on the body. It is therefore these delicate, receptive things that we receive our knowledge of the world. And therefore, it is only through a kind of weakness and softness that it is possible for knowledge to come to us. To put it another way, we have to come to terms with nature by wooing her rather than fighting her. And instead of holding nature at a distance through our objectivity as if she were an enemy, realize rather that she is to be known by her embrace. In the end, we must decide what we really want to know about. Do we trust nature, or would we rather try to manage the whole thing? Do we want to be some kind of omnipotent God in control of it all, or do we want to enjoy it instead? After all, we can't enjoy what we are anxiously trying to control. One of the nicest things about our bodies is that we don't have to think about them all the time. If, when you woke up in the morning, you had to think about every detail of your circulation, you would never get through the day. It was well said, the mystery of life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. The The song of birds, the voices of insects are all means of conveying truth to the mind. In flowers and grasses, we see messages of the Tao. The scholar, pure and clear of mind, serene and open of heart, should find in everything what nourishes him. But if you want to know where the flowers come from, even the god of spring doesn't know. And so it ends. So beautifully it ends. And it encourages us to experience things, experience the world more intimately. And that is it. I hope you learned quite a lot of things from this section, from I Ching, from the philosophy of Lao Tzu, that of Confucius, and all the Chinese sages, all that they have left behind, all kind of wisdom. Thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you the next time with another book. Thank you.